Quick heads up, this story gets graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion advised.
When the person responsible turns out to be a 13-year-old, that just breaks every possible mold. But what this 13-year-old did, what he did afterward, calmly joining the search party, it just defies all human logic. So when all the details from his childhood, along with the timeline of that day, finally form a complete picture, you start to understand just how deep this evil really went.
You can label me a monster, cold-blooded killer, demon child, Satan incarnate. I don't care what the name you give me.
So, of course, when crimes like this happen, where the person responsible is, well, essentially still a child, it instantly becomes a media sensation. It just breaks all the molds. Like, how is such a young person even capable of that? In the case of Eric Smith, a very similar infamous case from Great Britain immediately comes to mind, the James Bulger case. If you are in the UK, you definitely know what that's about. In that situation, 2 10-year-old children were responsible for what happened to 2-year-old James Bulger. 10-year-olds. There is another tragic similarity between these cases. He was only 4 years old. That boy was Derek Roby.
I'm not the same person.
Welcome to a new story. I won't drag this out, just let me know. What city are you from? What time is it where you are? What's your weather like? Also, what's your height?
So yes, this is the case we're looking at today. So I'll warn you right now, it won't be easy to listen to. This story definitely isn't for everyone. But with all that in mind, let's begin. Eric Smith was born January 22nd, 1980, which makes him an Aquarius. He grew up in the tiny town of Savona, New York, and he lived with his mom, Tammy, his stepfather, Ted, along with 2 other siblings. Right here, we need to stop because Eric's family structure is so confusing. I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. But the problems in Eric's life began even before he was born. First, his mom, Tammy, while pregnant with Eric, was divorcing her husband, Randy. She already had a child with Randy, a daughter named Stacy, but during the divorce, she was pregnant with Eric. Then Randy started claiming this wasn't his child. Eventually, Tammy took him to court, saying, you know what, I'll prove Eric is yours. They did a paternity test, which proved that Randy really was Eric's father. But this part is just amazing. Although it was proven Randy was the father, he still wanted nothing to do with Eric. It's just impossible to understand. Randy had a relationship with his other child, Stacy, but for some completely incomprehensible reason, he refused to acknowledge Eric. Why? What is so wrong with this child before he's even born that you're willing to abandon him, even when a DNA test says he's yours? So during this divorce process, which of course dragged on because of this whole mess, Tammy met another man, Ted Smith. As soon as her divorce was final, she married him almost immediately. Now, Ted became a real father to Eric, officially adopting him, meaning although Ted was the stepfather, legally he became the father. This is important because Eric, growing up, sincerely believed Ted was his biological father, which he obviously was not. The reason I'm explaining this in such detail, all this paternity drama will come back to play a role, but this was not Eric's only problem before birth. His mom, Tammy, suffered from epilepsy, so she had to take medication. She continued taking them during pregnancy, even though it was known these specific meds could cause developmental issues. While it's not proven 100%, there is a strong opinion that since Tammy took these meds, they did affect Eric's development, which it seems they did. You'll understand why, because he clearly had developmental problems. So Eric was born in his very first years. Nothing special happened. However, when he turned 2 years old, it became obvious he was developing much slower than other kids. At 2 years old, he still couldn't walk or talk. That's not just a little behind, that's a serious alarm bell. Around age 2 or 3, he finally started to walk, also to talk. But the problems didn't disappear, they just moved into behavior. He had regular daily tantrums. These weren't just kid tantrums.
There are a few more incidents, but we need to urgently move to his school life because that, combined with what happened to him there, is extremely important. In fact, Eric would later blame what happened to him at school for what he did. He was still developing much slower than his peers, so much so that he was held back in first, then again in 5th grade. But it wasn't just academic slowness. They say Eric, even at 13, had the mental age of an 8 or 9-year-old. Eric had very thick, bright red hair, his face was covered in freckles, while his ears were set a bit lower than usual. Due to poor eyesight, he had to wear glasses with very thick frames. There was nothing wrong with this, of course. Unfortunately, I'm sure many of us can relate to some extent. Eric was often seen just crying in a corner. Eric truly, desperately tried to fit in. He tried joining sports teams because he thought it would make him cool so people would like him. He tried hanging out in local parks, but nobody ever accepted him. He had almost no friends. The girls he was interested in just laughed at him, mocked him. So, Eric was often seen riding his bike alone around the neighborhood, which depressed him incredibly. So, that was his school life. But now we need to return home, because the situation there was no better. So here we return to the father issue. Remember, I said Eric believed from birth that his stepfather Ted was his biological father. Eric got very upset because he genuinely believed Ted was his father. That's when his mom, Tammy, also his stepfather Ted, decide to confess to Eric. They tell him that Ted really isn't his biological father. Eric is absolutely shocked. He's crushed. Imagine, his whole world, his whole identity, just got turned upside down. This is where it gets even more confusing. Randy, the real biological father, reappears on the scene. Remember, Tammy had another child from Randy, her daughter Stacy. Stacy continued to have a relationship with her father Randy. Eric knew who Randy was. He sometimes came to the house, picked up Stacy, spent time with her. But to Eric, he was just Stacy's dad. Now Eric is being told this man is his time's real father, but that's not the worst part. The worst part is that even after Eric learned the truth, Randy still wanted nothing to do with him. I just can't wrap my head around this. He maintains a relationship with his daughter, who lives in the same house, but flat out refuses to acknowledge his son, who also lives there. Why? He just couldn't accept that his own father looked right through him.
This was the first huge problem at home, but now we need to move on to the problems with his stepfather, Ted. Because you might have thought Ted was a good person. After all, he adopted Eric when his real father abandoned him. It seemed like here he was, the real father. At first, Ted, of course, denied everything, tried to sweep it under the rug. But then Ted admitted he did it. His excuse, I only did it once, so it's not that bad. How is that? Even if it was once, you still did it. It doesn't matter. After this revelation, the family went to a psychologist. Seriously, a psychologist. Ted should have been put in jail, period. So we fast forward to 1993. Eric is now 13 years old. We are getting closer, ever closer to the tragic events of today's case. At this point, Eric's life really started to spiral. I mean, it was already unraveling to some degree, but now it began to fall apart even more. Whenever someone said hello to him, he would just look at them with this scary, emotionless stare. The whole time I was doing research, I, of course, came across photos of Eric. He always has this cold, dead look. I'm telling you, there's something in his eyes that really scares me. He becomes even more isolated.
This isn't just a red flag. This is a giant, roaring siren. Ted, being the real father of the year, told Eric to take it out on a punching bag or a tree. Go do something. Just hit something. So what did Eric do? He went, punched a tree. It solved nothing. Shocker. This is what really frustrates me about this case. He was crying out for help. This would have been the perfect time for his parents, Tammy, Ted, Randy. If Randy could even be bothered to show up. This would have been the perfect time to maybe get Eric to a specialist. I'm sure his parents knew about it. He's acting out in the neighborhood. He's acting out at school. His behavior is screaming for help. Again, I am not excusing what Eric does next. Not at all. But parents need to be parents. They needed to step in. They needed to do something, but they didn't. Even though this escalation in behavior, you can see where this is headed. Soon, a very small, sweet, innocent child got caught up in this. That sweet, little, innocent child was Derek Roby. Derek Roby was born October 2nd, 1988. In 1993, when this case took place, Derek was only 4 years old. He lived in the same small town as Eric, which was Savona, New York. Derek lived with his parents, Dale, Doreen, his younger brother Dalton, who was 18 months old. Derek, as a child, was described as curious, confident, fearless, energetic. He loved to have fun. He loved to joke around. He was a sweet little boy with a heart of gold. He adored his younger brother, loved spending time with Dalton. He was one of those kids who was excited about life. He was always up for anything, always had a smile on his face, always wanted to dive into everything. He cared so deeply for animals. He actually really loved earthworms, which he would collect in his garden, give them cute little names. It's such a stark contrast to Eric, isn't it? Derek also loved playing sports. His favorite sport was t-ball. Derek also just loved being involved in the community. He was actually given the title of the unofficial mayor of Savona because he would literally just start waving at everyone like he was the actual mayor. He was so loved by so many people. He had this cheeky smile. So, Monday, August 2nd, 1993, arrives. At this time, there was a local summer camp happening in Savona. Derek was attending it. He loved summer camp. Well, what else do you expect? He loves being involved in everything. On August 2nd, he was running late for summer camp. He was really anxious about getting there. He needed to get to the rec park to play t-ball, which was his favorite sport. But his younger brother, Dalton, was teething. His gums were sore. He was a bit fussy. Derek's mom, Doreen, was naturally distracted with Dalton. It was already 9:10 a.m. Derek needed to be at summer camp at 9, so he was already late. So Derek begged his mom. He said, "Mom, please, just let me walk by myself. It's only a block away. I'll be fine. I don't want to be late anymore." I mean, he's only 4 years old. He's exactly 2 months away from turning 5. But she had never let Derek walk anywhere by himself before. She was very worried. She said something like, "I don't think so. No." But Derek begged, pleaded, please mom, please let me go. I don't want to miss anything." Doreen starts thinking, oh, maybe I should just let him walk by himself. It's only a block away. He's walked this route hundreds of times. He knows the way. We live in a very small town. Nothing bad ever happens. Everyone knows everyone. It's that same fatal small town logic that fails so often. So eventually, Doreen lets Derek walk to summer camp by himself, a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. So Derek heads off to the park. It's now 9:15 a.m. The day's activities had already started in the park, but someone else was there. Who was it? It was Eric Smith.
Eric wasn't in the summer camp. He just decided to go there that morning. That's what he wanted to do. And he was riding his bike. The camp counselor at one point even had to reprimand Eric, tell him to get out of there. After Eric was kicked out, he's furious. He disappears. He's very angry. Just at that moment, as Eric is riding away on his bike, he spots tiny Derek holding tightly onto his lunch bag. Oh my gosh, I don't usually get this fired up. I have to warn you. This next part will not be easy to hear. So as soon as Eric spots Derek, he rides his bike up to him, starts saying, hey kid. Now, Derek's parents had told him not to talk to strangers. So Derek keeps his head down. He's probably very nervous right now. This stranger, Eric, although he's 13, he's still going to be a giant to Derek, who is only 4. He's probably nervous that this big kid is approaching him on his bike, but Eric goes right up to Derek, says, hey kid, I know you're going to the park. I can show you a shortcut. Derek, like I said, is very nervous. All he says is, I'm not supposed to. Now, you can assume Derek is saying, I'm not supposed to, meaning I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. But Eric insists, and he's like, it's okay. Like, I know a shortcut. You'll be safe. So Derek agrees to go with Eric. This really breaks my heart because Derek did the right thing. He said something like, no, I'm not supposed to. But Eric convinced him. Kids, as we know, are generally trusting. But there's a nuance. A child will trust another child almost instantly because they see them as a peer, as safe. That's exactly what Derek does. He trusts Eric. So Eric ditches his bike, leads Derek on this supposed shortcut into a wooded area. It's right off the road, but it's a very dense area. You only have to go a few feet in. Nobody can see you. He started eating Derek's lunch, which he had scattered on the ground. He took the red Kool-Aid, started drinking. He needed to refresh himself. He wiped his hands on his pants, left the woods, got his bike, then calmly returned to the park. But just 5 minutes later, he wanted to go back just to check if Derek, really didn't make it.
He returned to the scene. I can't believe I'm saying this. Eric, I want to emphasize this, felt absolutely no remorse. Because over the next hour, he returned to the scene several times. A couple of hours later, it started to rain, so the kids from the summer camp were sent home. Eric had also returned home by that time. Now Doreen, Derek's mom, saw the other kids coming back. She waited for Derek, but, of course, he didn't arrive. She felt that specific panic only a mother can feel. I watched a documentary with her where she explained that earlier that day, she suddenly felt a cold wave just pass through her, an instant feeling that something terrible had happened. She brushed it off at the time, but now she thinks that was the exact moment Derek was gone. So she's panicking. She calls the police. This was a very close-knit community. The word spread instantly, so everyone rushed out to search.
100 police officers and volunteers searched the area for 5 hours this afternoon using canine dogs and helicopters.
The police were there. Eric's family joined the search. Eric, himself, also joined the search party. 4 hours passed. Everyone was still searching. But finally, around 3:45 p.m., a scream was heard from that same wooded area near the park. Of course, that's when the parents' worst fear came true.
just, things just don't happen in Savona like that,
Neighbors watched in disbelief as their quiet street where their children play was turned into a crime scene.
Can't understand why there wasn't more kids out, and nobody had seen anything. It's not like anybody just pick up a kid and take him out to the woods or anything like that. It's just shocked all of us. It's really bad.
This was no longer a missing child case. Derek's parents were absolutely crushed. I cannot imagine that pain.
Time for us to start over, as our 1.5-year-old son does not understand why his brother isn't riding next to him in the car or eating cereal with him in the morning.
Now police needed to find who did this. The story of what happened to Derek spread. Parents in the community were terrified because everyone automatically assumed the specifics. I just can't share those details here due to platform policies. This only reinforced the police belief this had to be an adult. They started checking registries of offenders, looking for suspects recently released from prison, or any adult in the community. But not once. Asterisk, not one time, asterisk. Did police even consider that another child could have done this? Police interviewed everyone, including the kids from the camp. Of course, they interviewed Eric. During the first interview, he didn't say anything special. But Eric's mom, Tammy, felt something was wrong. She didn't think he was responsible, no, but she was sure he was hiding something. 3 days after the first interview, she called the police to the house herself so they could talk to Eric again. She genuinely believed he could help the investigation. That's when Eric decides to help. He tells police, "Yeah, I saw Derek that morning at 9:15. I was on my bike. He was walking to camp. I just rode past him." Police ask for details. What was he wearing? Eric starts to get nervous. "Oh, I didn't see much. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I couldn't see well." But times right after this asterisk, Eric describes Derek's clothing perfectly. The police tensed up. "Wait, you're saying you were on your bike, without glasses, you couldn't see well, but you remember every detail of his clothes?" Eric's vision, without glasses, was truly terrible. They still didn't think he was responsible, but they definitely knew he was lying. Then police ask Eric to recreate the morning's events. Eric enthusiastically agrees. This is classic behavior from those responsible who love being part of the investigation, but he's 13. They do the reenactment. Eric is on his bike. An officer stands where Derek was. Eric, without his glasses, cannot see the officer clearly. This became a huge exclamation point for the detectives, but there were other warning signs during the questioning. He was offered a drink, a glass of red Kool-Aid. As soon as Eric saw the drink, he lost his composure, knocking the glass to the floor. They immediately made the connection. Another signal.
Then getting angry, Eric slams his fist on the table. "You think I'm the one responsible, don't you?" This is incredibly suspicious behavior, but I have to stress, the police still did not believe he was the one responsible. They were stubbornly holding on to the theory that he was just a witness, which is why he knew these details. Nobody wanted to believe the impossible. The next few days, the investigation continues. Eric's behavior gets weirder. His stories to his family have tons of inconsistencies. He keeps changing details. But the biggest signal, Eric starts repeatedly asking adults, what would the punishment be if the person responsible turned out to be a kid? During these same days, another disturbing incident happens. Eric is sleeping over at a family friend's house in the room of their 15-year-old son, Jason, who he was friendly with. At this point, everyone around Eric knew something is going on. They staged an intervention for him. Parents, grandparents, even his great-grandfather. All the adults are pressuring him, admit what you know. Eric is silent for half an hour. Then suddenly, he breaks. He turns to his mom, says, "Mom, I did it. I'm sorry, Mom." The family is in shock. They couldn't believe it. And they thought until the end he had just seen something. Not that he was the one responsible. Eric's great-grandfather, a former sheriff, immediately called the police. Eric was taken to the station where he gave a full confession. During this confession, while recounting the details, everyone in that room was in absolute shock. When Eric finally went to trial, it was almost a year after the incident.
Excuse us, please. Jack, would you stay with him? Frank? Appreciate it. I'm on it.
County Court is now in session. The Honorable Donald G. Purple Jr. presiding.
The trial of the People versus Eric Smith is finally underway.
The trial in the case, The People versus Eric Smith, led by Purper Jr., finally began. So the media, of course, turned this case into a real show. They immediately gave Eric a nickname, the freckle-faced killer. Honestly, I'm not a fan of how media gives people who do this catchy names, but giving a nickname based on appearance, seriously. But this case really was unique because Eric was a child. He was 13 when he did that. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were everywhere. Eric's defense, of course, focused on his troubled past. They tried to paint a picture of Eric also being a then asked for this to be considered.
It really is an expert's case. It's a case that belongs to psychiatrists, and if it goes to trial, there'll be psychiatrists on both sides, and the jury will decide which psychiatrist they give more weight to.
That's what is popularly called in the insanity defense. I certainly expect that that's going to be relied upon heavily by the defense, sure. They have to.
Ironically, both the family of the accused and the family of the victim sat beside each other in court. Derek Roby's parents wore matching T-shirts from a weekend fundraiser organized by a town still struggling to understand.
It's very difficult. You know, people were not able to continue to direct their anger towards an unknown assailant. It suddenly became a young person, another person's life shattered.
Eric Smith is being tried as an adult, but he left court with a wave to his parents, behaving like the 13-year-old he is.
They argued Eric wasn't in control of his actions, that he suffered from depression. Also, get this, he had a nicotine addiction. I had never heard of a nicotine addiction being used as a defense in a case like this, but yes, they said it. They also added a diagnosis of intermittent explosive disorder. But the prosecution wasn't going to hear it. They brought in their own doctors who ran a bunch of tests on Eric, and the conclusion was simple. He was fine. At least there was nothing that could medically explain or justify his actions. Throughout the whole trial, Eric had that same eerily empty look on his face. It's scary. He was completely emotionless, no remorse, no apologies. But one thing happened during the trial that just infuriated everyone. One day, Eric walked into the courtroom wearing a T-shirt with the Tasmanian devil. You might be thinking, so what? Oh, there's a lot wrong with it. First, the Tasmanian devil was Derek's favorite cartoon. But what's worse, on the day of the incident, Derek was wearing a Tasmanian devil T-shirt. Eric, of course, knew this. He had described it perfectly. This just shouldn't have been allowed. I don't care if Eric liked the cartoon himself. His defense team, where were they? This was either incredible incompetence or a deliberate, disgusting provocation. The main question remained, why? Eric tried to explain that it had nothing to do with Derek, nothing personal. It could have been anyone in Derek's place. In the end, the jury unanimously found Eric guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to a term of 9 years to life. This is a bit of a strange phrasing, but I assume it's related to him being a minor at the time of the incident. 9 years was the minimum he had to serve before his first hearing. Eric was sent to a juvenile detention center.
Feeling since this happened a year ago. Most people in Savona know both families involved. The Smiths and the Robys live less than a mile away from each other. Today, people here say they feel a sense of relief, but will always be affected by what happened here a year ago.
It's difficult to talk about because there are so many mixtures of feelings, and it's such a personal thing, different levels for each person, but it's such a personal thing that's happened, and we don't know how to verbalize it.
The people here are trying to focus on Derek Roby, not Eric Smith. A ballpark will go up in the next year in Derek Roby's name, and a statue will be placed here as well. In Savona, Mary Bubala, News Source 13.
2 nights ago, Ted Smith learned his adopted son, who is just 14, could spend the rest of his life in prison. Today, he stood in a park across from the courthouse, clutched a paper, and tried to make sense of it all.
Our hearts were broken over the results of this trial, but we grieve not only for ourselves, we grieve for the Roby family. Our hearts go out to them. We long for peace for them.
The written statement comes out of the pain of those early hours after the verdict. Ted and Tammy Smith left court in tears. Later, they sat at the kitchen table and wrote these words.
We think the results of the trial were wrong because our son has a mental problem. But we trust that our system of justice will right this wrong someday.
Eric Smith's attorney characterized the mental problem as a rage disorder that prevented Eric from controlling his actions. Jurors rejected that idea. In the end, the teenager, who showed little emotion otherwise, cried.
I certainly couldn't tell you whether he was crying because they were crying or he was crying because he understood what was happening.
The case will be appealed. With shaking hands and a quivering voice, Eric's stepfather asked jurors to pray for his family.
We have faith that there is a pattern at work here that is for justice and peace. And we trust in time, all of us, the Robys, our families, and the rest of the community will find peace again.
Where he stayed until he was 21, then he was transferred to an adult prison. In 2004, at age 24, after 11 years behind bars, Eric had his first chance to ask for parole. At this hearing, he revealed some very disturbing things. Unsurprisingly, his parole was denied. But now he could apply every 2 years, which was a real nightmare for Derek's parents. Imagine, every 2 years, they had to publicly relive this whole terrible experience over again. So 2 years later, denied. Another 2 years later, denied again. Eric even gave a television interview where he tried to show he had changed, that he was remorseful, again repeating that his...
My wasn't directed at Derek at all. It was directed at all the other guys who used to pick on me. When I was there, that was what I saw in my head. I'm not the same person.
But, of course, even after that interview, every time he filed a petition, he was denied. So here, I think it's time to mention that same James Bulger case I mentioned at the beginning, because it's a critically important parallel to today's. In that case, 2 10-year-old boys, John Venables, also Robert Thompson, went to prison for what they did, so they were both released. They were released after only 8 years. 8 years. For such a terrible, premeditated act, the system decided that at 18, they had served their time, ready to return. When they were released, they were given new identities, a new life at the state's expense. So here, the paths diverged drastically. We have Robert Thompson, who just disappeared after his release. He stays in the shadows. As far as we know, he hasn't had any problems with the law. Of course, we don't know his new name, but it seems he's in a relationship, living a completely normal life. Maybe rehabilitation worked, but there's John Venables, who went the diametrically opposite way. Since his release, he's constantly had problems with the law, returned to prison several times. So, for what? All his new offenses involving illicit materials, involving minors. So, that's why I mentioned the Bulger case. It's a perfect, though terrible, example of what can happen when such people are released. One, it seems, was rehabilitated. The other was not, becoming even more dangerous. Which brings us to the main question. Which of these paths is Eric Smith closer to? In October 2021, Eric applied for parole again. He was 41 years old. After so many failed attempts, this time, his petition was granted.
It's a story everyone living in the Rochester area in the 1990s remembers. 1993. 13-year-old Eric Smith was sent to prison for the crime, and it wasn't until today, almost 30 years later, he was released. He walked out of the Woodburn Correctional Facility in Sullivan County, a free man, set to live in Queens County on parole. Christian Garzone dove into our archives tonight to bring us back to the tragedy that gripped an entire region and country. Christian.
Well, Adam, we're told Smith will stay with his mother and will then get an apartment or a house with his fiancée somewhere downstate in Queens County. We're told that's a sigh of relief to residents in Steuben County. The DA there says this is tough to stomach and is tonight thinking of Derek Roby's family. Eric Smith said during his parole board hearing last year that near a summer camp in Steuben County in 1993. There, Smith saw 4-year-old Derek Roby walking alone. The district attorney in Steuben County, Brooks Baker, today said Smith being set free is tough for many to stomach.
It's a tough day for any of us here in Steuben County law enforcement, particularly those of us who were around when this happened.
The Buffalo News reported during the trial that Eric's mother, Tammy Smith, felt her son knew something about Derek Roby's. Eric just said, I don't know, crying. Part of the defense at the trial was that Tammy took combined medicines while pregnant with Eric. The jury rejected that defense, as well as the stories of Eric. Smith was convicted of murder and spent almost 28 years behind bars. Smith told the parole board last year he hopes one day Derek Roby's family can forgive him.
The only thing that I can think of is just the concern for the Roby family. Obviously, the limited contact I had with them, they're great people, and this is just one more re-victimization.
Now, Smith will be on parole under the conditions he cannot leave New York State without permission and has agreed to constant monitoring and check-ins with his parole officer. Adam, back to you.
All right, Christian, thank you. Eric Smith's parole had been denied 10 consecutive times until it was granted in October. The delay in his release was due to not having an approved address.
In February 2022, Eric Smith was released from prison. As far as is known, he now lives in Queens, New York, living his life. So here's what's striking. He stated he wants to work with children, as if he, like no one else, understands them. I'll say it directly. I don't think he should be working with children, period. Never. Under any circumstances, to allow a person with such a past, it's a slap in the face to Derek's memory. I don't know if he already works with children. I only know this is his stated goal. I sincerely hope he follows the path of Robert Thompson, just disappears, never commits another offense, that he really is rehabilitated, at least on paper. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm worried. This story shows that the scariest monster isn't born, but made. Maybe you have your own story related to this. Tell us in the comments, let's discuss it together. So if this story affected you, subscribe so you don't miss the next case that will disturb you even more. May Derek Roby rest in peace. The Bible says, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. This story is living proof of that. Take this as a lesson. Never ignore a cry for help, even if it looks like aggression. Because a child who isn't helped to cope with their own demons, one day will release them onto someone else. Now look at the screen. You see the next videos we've prepared for you. Believe me, if this case disturbed you, the next one will surpass everything you've seen. So we're not saying goodbye. May God protect you, also your loved ones. See you there.